are in Joshua chapter 5, beginning in verse 13 through the last little bit of this chapter and chapter 6. You will remember that last week we talked about how they crossed the Jordan River. They have had that miraculous crossing, God showing how he's going to supply their every need, how they'll be able to overcome whatever obstacle is in their way. It's kind of important because they're about to go attack Jericho. And the whole people, and even the kings of Jericho and these other cities around, are terrified of the Israelites. You know, they kind of just crossed over on dry land in this Jordan River. And so they are cowering, waiting to see what God is going to do. The Israelites had their circumcision, kind of a group circumcision there, and getting themselves sanctified, consecrated, ready to do the Lord's will. And we noted that this is when the manna ends, and they are now eating of the produce of the land. Starting out as just some of the basics that they can get quickly and easily, but over time they're going to get more and more of the milk and honey that was promised to them. So before they actually go and attack Jericho, we have an interesting little event that takes place. Joshua is by Jericho. He's gone closer for some reason. We're not given any reason why. He may have been scouting some things himself, but this was before the whole army of Israel was actually going forward. And he stumbles across a strange man, and he's very startled by this. This man is holding a sword that is drawn and ready to use. And Joshua doesn't know who this is. So what's the natural reaction here when you see a warrior, a soldier, and you're in enemy territory, and you don't know who he is?
He thought it was the Lord.
Yeah, well, he didn't know who he was at first. They just, are you for us or against us, basically? Like, you know, are you one of the soldiers in my army that I don't know by face, or are you somebody from Jericho? Who exactly are you?
Well, the natural reaction is to draw your sword.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're in enemy territory. This could be a scout from Jericho. This could be, you know, any of the people around. It's kind of a dangerous situation. And so Joshua asks, you know, are you with us or with the enemy? And question number 1 in your lesson is explain the commander of the Lord's army's response to Joshua's question. What does he mean? Well, how does he answer Joshua? And saying it's Christ here, which I'm inclined to agree with as well. What is the exact answer he gives? David?
No. His name. And he asked him, are you with us or against us? And he said, no. It's kind of like a anyway.
Yeah.
But then he clarified, obviously.
That is kind of a fascinating answer, isn't it? Are you for us or against us? No. I am neither of those things because that's not really the important part. The clarification, the important part is I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Well, you might say, well, it means he's on Joshua's side. No, Joshua's on the Lord's side, and that's the difference here. Joshua is on this commander's side. And so that is a revelation of the fact that there are larger forces at play here. In one sense, Joshua is the commander of the army of the Lord, right? He's the commander of Israel. He is the commander of this army that is going forward. He has been, you know, duly empowered by God and validated by the Lord as leader. We talked about a bunch in this, how God keeps lifting Joshua up so that the people have confidence in him and know to follow him. But here we have a different commander of the army of the Lord, and that is much more of a spiritual commander. So what does Joshua, what does he understand by this response is the other part of this. here.
Then you lift God.
Yeah, so he is duly impressed. He falls down on his face to the earth. He worshiped and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" So he's worshiping this man because he obviously believes that this is somebody very powerful, somebody worthy of worship. So who does that make this out to be?
Either Jesus or God.
Yeah, I think it probably is Jesus. That's somewhat contentious on whether it is Jesus for sure or not. There are some people who believe that this is just an angel. I have a hard time with it being just an angel, right? Because he falls down and worships, and the angel doesn't say, "Get up," like so many of the angels do, right? The angels tend to be very impressive and to inspire that sense of awe in people, yet they also don't want to be worshipped. This angel, if it's an angel, seems to be just fine with being worshipped. And so, I don't know, some of the explanations I've seen for that is he's not really worshiping, he's just showing honor, and I'm like, nah, we're splitting hairs here. It really says worshipped. I think it's easier to understand that this is Jesus, that this is the commander of the Lord's army.
I kind of look at it a little differently. I'm not saying, I wouldn't say that it's not Jesus. We'll know when we get to heaven, but I kind of took it as Michael. You know, because he was the one that God sent for those kinds of things. And I'm totally wrong, but I just kind of hit me like, well, he's that word captain, I looked it up, and also he's prince, now that kind of makes it like Christ. But
Yeah.
But again, I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and so that's the kind of the two choices out of this. That I think you're left with it either being Jesus or it has to be an angel like Michael, and that you have to dilute the word worship a little bit here. And that it is not impossible. I mean, the word worship here, like my version has a footnote on that that says it can also be translated pay homage. So there is a sense in which people bow before a king or someone of power, and it's not exactly worship, it's homage, it's respect, it's kind of throwing yourself before them. And you can have that understanding if you're going to read this. I don't know that you can have the understanding that it's Michael or some other angel, and he is worshiping him as deity, and the angel is okay with that. Like, now that is a collection of things that doesn't make sense together. But your options are basically this is Jesus, and Joshua is rightly worshiping him, or this is a powerful angel like Michael, and Joshua is showing respect to him.
Well, the fact that he told him to take his shoes off goes back to when God appeared in the burning bush and told Moses to take his shoes off.
Yeah.
So to me, if you gotta take your shoes off, you're on holy ground, you're in the presence of deity.
Yeah. So that's the parallel here, that we have the exact same thing being said to Joshua that was said to Moses when Moses was there at the burning bush. Take off your sandals, the place where you're standing is holy. So God is certainly present because that thing is being said there. Now, the counter argument to that is if this is an angel telling him that, then he's saying, take off your sandals, this is holy ground, the Lord is about to speak, wait for him to do so. And that is that's not impossible. The thing against that, though, is Joshua has already gotten a word from the Lord at other times, without having to take his sandals off, without having to have that extra special reverence that is found in the presence of God. And so that is referring to the instructions that God is about to give in chapter 6. I don't know. To me, it's easier to see it as this is Jesus. That Jesus is there to carry out the work of the Father, to lead the Lord's armies against Jericho. That puts it together a little neater and tidier to me. But it's one of those things that is maybe impossible to conclusively prove either way, depends which reason you prefer. Mark?
Yeah, just a couple of things. It's interesting, he only removes one of the sandals, he doesn't remove both. And it's also interesting to me that that word worship is the same word that's used when Abraham sees the three visitors coming to him. He does the same thing, he bows down before them, and that same word is used. So, it's kind of hard to be too definitive about who this could be.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the fact that he's not being told, don't worship me, is the big indicator that this is somebody big.
Yeah.
With big
Right.
standing.
That's what complicates it. You bring in some of these other occasions where it says, a man came to visit like that, where it's clearly an angel or Jesus. I mean, some people think that Jesus was among the group who went and visited Abraham there. And again, it's hard to conclusively prove, but that's not impossible. That certainly is a possibility here, Aaron.
What are the challenges or difficulties with it being Jesus? Why all the debate? Are there issues with that?
No, not necessarily. The only issue with it is it just doesn't tell what to say. Part of the problem is sometimes people are reluctant to attribute something to Jesus in the Old Testament, which I think is unfounded because Jesus is certainly active in the Old Testament. His role is a little bit more hidden than it is in the New Testament. But like I said, my gut instinct here is to say this is Jesus. I think it fits better, but it doesn't have to be conclusive either way. Brandon?
Never says angel.
No, it doesn't.
Normally it does. And then it also says as commander of the Lord's army.
Yeah.
He didn't say, I am the commander of the Lord's army. As commander of the Lord's army, I'm coming to greet you. And he says, take your sandals off. But he says, my Lord. And he allows him to say, my Lord. David said, my Lord said to the Lord. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word was Christ.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody could take a picture of him at that point and then seeing that later, but there's no indication here that it's an angel, especially by what he says and takes the Lord. And like you said, didn't say stop. There was no humility there. It was like, it is as you have said.
Yeah, and that to me, I agree, is kind of the biggest clue of this is probably Jesus. Either way, the point that's being made here is Joshua and the people of Israel are not going into battle alone. And in fact, it's not even like they're going into battle and God's going to sit back and help them. Remember, that's so often how the pagan peoples looked at their gods. Basically, weapons that they could call upon. It's my people are going to go to war with your people, and if we pray hard enough, our God might give us some, divine support and empower us a bit, or foil you, or do some sort of miracle to make things harder for you. That's not how this is going to go. And when we see the actual destruction of Jericho, the people are involved, but it's very much God-led. This is God's judgment against Jericho, not just God playing a supporting role for the people of Israel. So Joshua does take off his sandals from his feet. He recognizes that the place where he's standing is holy. He is definitely humbled by this. And we get that parenthetical note in verse 1 that Jericho was shut up inside and outside because the people of Israel, none went out and none came in. They have seen Israel coming. They are preparing. They are making sure that they are well defended. And they are well defended. Let me give you some pictures here of what Jericho looked like. So this is a model of the city of Jericho. And it is up on a hill, basically, up on a mound. So this center part of the city is up high. This bit of the lower wall, that is an embankment, like a retaining wall, basically. And just this part right here is 12 to 15 feet high. On top of that retaining wall, they have a 6-foot thick mud brick wall that goes another 20 to 26 feet high. That's this kind of red part there. So it goes up very high. Then you have this outer part of the city. This is still on the side of the mound. You can't really tell like some of the perspective of how much it's sloping, but that's sloping there. And you have people who live in houses in that outer part of Jericho. That's kind of the slum of Jericho. It's not within the inner wall. It's not the core part of the city. It's the overflow. It's where the poorer people live. Rahab lived in that part of the city. She lived in a house that was up against one of these walls somewhere, kind of built into the wall. So it continues to slope up, up, up. The base of this inner wall here starts out about the height of the inner wall there. So this is incredibly high. And this mud brick wall is basically like this one, in that it's another 20 to 26 feet high. I want you to imagine being outside of that city and just looking up at this. This is impossibly tall. They have far too much to get over. This is not going to be easy to even gain access to the city. You have a very intimidating outer wall here, and then that only gets you into the slum. You still got to get through the inner wall before you can get to the main part of Jericho. And there are all sorts of things that they can do to make life harder for you as you're trying to do all of that. They can get up on top of that wall and shooting at you, hurling things at you, all the anti-siege tactics that the world has come up with. Okay. This is another picture, another model of Jericho superimposed on a picture of the area where it was. So you have kind of satellite imagery around here, and this is a model of Jericho plopped right on top where it actually would have been. So kind of interesting to see that, I think. Again, very intimidating, very tall, very difficult to get up and into that city. How are they going to conquer it? Well, God's going to give some instructions, and it's not going to be particularly easy. This is a picture of, over here, this is the retaining wall, and these are some of the ruins of the mud brick wall that would have been up on top of this and gone way, way, way up high. They have since, crumbled for reasons that we'll get into. And they are there on the side. I'll leave that one up there for you. Okay. So there are some strange instructions given to the people, given to Joshua first. The soldiers are to go surround the city. One of the things that we miss sometimes, because the wording can be a little bit opaque if we're not careful, is that it wasn't all of the people and all of the soldiers who were marching around and around the city going in circles. The word for what the soldiers are doing is just surround. So they get into a big circle around the city of Jericho, and then they are waiting. The priests are to take the ark. It's 7 priests with 7 trumpets, and they're carrying the ark. And they are to march around, not just surround, but actually march around the city 1 time each day for days 1 through 6. And so they are on the inside of that circle, but still a bit away from the wall of Jericho, presumably out of range of being shot at. Joshua assigns an entourage of soldiers, kind of a symbolic gesture, that there would be a few in front and a few behind the ark and the priests there, and they are there just to escort the ark on its trip around the city every day. So I want you to imagine this scene. All of the people and all of the soldiers are standing all around this city, in a big circle, just standing there, watching, waiting. It says specifically they were told to be silent. No war whoops, no shouting, no hustle and bustle. They're standing there in a circle, watching and waiting to see what God is going to do. The Ark of the Covenant is in an interior circle between the people and the city, and it marches around one time every day, makes a lap, with soldiers with it. Yes?
Do we know how far around it is?
Yeah, it's actually not that big, really. It was, what was it? Just saw that when I was looking at this. It was like 9 acres or something. It's really not that big of an area. I'm not sure what that would make the perimeter, but the city was not overly large. It was estimated that there were probably like 1,200 people who lived here normally. There would have been more at that time because some of the people, the areas around, would have fled to Jericho, seeing Israel coming in. They probably had a couple thousand people who were, holed up there in Jericho, hoping that Israel would be beaten back. So this is not like taking a lap around San Diego. It's a lot smaller than that. Remember, this is thousands of years ago, too. Populations were smaller. This is just 800 or 1,200 people sounds like nothing to us, but that still was significant even at the time. So the ark's making its lap on a day, and the people are there just waiting. The text keeps interjecting. If you actually read the text of this section, like every other phrase, it talks about the trumpets. And I think that's on purpose. Well, I know it's on purpose. Everything in there is on purpose. But it keeps interjecting that the trumpets were blasting. So let's pull this up, and it says, the 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of a trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout. And the city will fall flat, and the people shall go up. When it actually does it, down like in verse 8, the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord went forward, blowing the trumpets, with the ark of the covenant following them. The armed men were walking before the priests who were blowing the trumpets, and the rear guard was walking after the ark, while the trumpets blew continually. It keeps talking about the trumpets over and over and over. And really, the idea of that should get in your head is as you're reading this, I want you to hear blasting trumpets in your head. It's just meant to show how much they were blowing those trumpets, and how eerie must this have been for the people of Jericho. They have all of Israel encircling the city, not doing anything. They're not attacking. They don't even look like they're preparing for anything. They're not talking. They're not shouting. They're not hustling and bustling and all the things that they might be doing. They're just standing there. And the Ark of the Covenant makes its lap, and the priests are blasting those trumpets the whole way around. That's all they're doing. And it's weird the first day. It's really weird the second day. 3rd day, 4th day, 5th day, 6th day. Nothing's happening. I don't know what Jericho was thinking about this. All the people were thinking. They're hearing all these trumpets. They're seeing the people doing something. Were they afraid? Were they confused? Were they, mocking the people for this?
I'm thinking, hey, we're in this impenetrable fortress.
Yeah.
Nothing can get in. Nothing can stop us. Our God is with. Our gods are with us.
Yes.
And so we'll just sit in here, keep the gate closed, let them march around until they get tired and move off.
Right. If you think about, siege tactics, what was often done if you couldn't break through a wall or get over a wall, breach it in some way, is you surrounded the city and you just waited. You might kind of attack occasionally, but you waited for them to run out of food. So you see this city up here on a hill, and they rely on the farms and on all the produce of the area around them. One legitimate tactic could be to get everyone around, block off anyone from leaving or entering, and eventually they run out of food. The problem with that here is Jericho's got a lot of food. You know, the time that they came in was right after harvest. So if your plan is to starve them out, you would pick the worst possible time to do so. They have lots of food available, lots of water available. They can be happy in there for months and months, maybe longer. This is going to be a hard thing if Israel really is just going to wait them out. So yeah, I don't know exactly what the people of Jericho were thinking. Probably opinions vary. We know that they were terrified because Israel was able to cross the Jordan River. We know that their hearts melted within them. I don't know if they got any of their courage back as those 6 days passed of the ark making its lap around and people just standing there. Maybe, like Randy's saying, they were starting to think, okay, they're just going to starve us out. Well, little do they know, we can last a long time like that. Maybe we can beat them after all.
Now, let's be the devil's advocate here. Joshua says, hey, you zillions of people in Israel, we're going to march around here once every day. And then at the end of the seventh day, we're going to shout and the walls are going to come down. And we're going to go on and wipe everybody out. And can you imagine to believe that? If everybody had to believe that, to march around? It's kind of like Naaman the Syrian when he dipped in the Jordan. At 3 times around, is it half as weak? At 7 times around, do you see anything crumbling? The thing is, an act of faith. God said it, and they believed it. They acted on it and did it. This is a good test for us. If we were out there, what would we be thinking? When we're faced with an impossible task, like where am I going to get that next job? How am I going to solve this health problem? What am I going to do for this situation and that? And I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. And you ask for God's help. Wouldn't it be nice if you just excited and say, wow, God's going to help me. I'm just going to sit back and see what he does.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice to have that faith?
And it would. And that's what God is trying to show them here. To show them that they're not going to take Jericho by their own force, though they are going to do some fighting later. They are going to be involved. It's not that they are doing nothing, but they are not doing enough to really take this city of their own military prowess. Typically, even if you were doing the starve them out strategy, you would be working on other things too to see it, because you got to support your own army there and help may come from some other place. So you would be launching other attacks periodically to try to breach the wall. They would build these siege mounds, basically just piling up dirt to make a ramp so that they can get up over the wall. You might bring ladders, you might do all sorts of things. If you're the Greeks, you might build a big horse and hide your soldiers in it. You do all sorts of things like that to try to get through the wall. Because once you're through the wall, you can really attack. But the slow way is trying to wait for them all to starve. The medium way is to weaken their morale and their strength by getting them to partially starve and then breaching the wall in some other way. The fast way is just to be strong enough to punch a hole through that wall yourself, or through the gate, or climb up over the top, and then you can go attack them. Israel isn't really falling in line with any of those strategies because they look like they're just waiting there and doing nothing. They're not making any progress on anything else. They're not trying anything. They're not working on a siege mound. They're not getting ladders to be able to get over the top of the wall. They're not doing anything except sending the Ark of the Covenant round and round the city. That's a nice religious gesture, but it's not that intimidating, is it? Well, maybe it is, because the people were afraid of God. And they knew that God had gotten them to cross the Jordan, so what's God going to do now? What else? There's kind of an interesting thing that you notice here. It says that on the second day, after they've done this one day, Joshua is very eager. He rises early so that he can arrange for this to happen on day 2 as well. Not surprising that Joshua is eager. And after one day of the people being looped around the city and the ark going around, I don't know what everyone in Israel is thinking. Randy made a good point about the faith that was necessary for them to accept this as a viable strategy. But after one day, there's no evidence of anything happening yet. Joshua is up early on day 2 to make sure that they don't lose any steam, to make sure that they get going again and continue on with God's plan. By the time we get to day 7, everybody's excited. Everybody's eager. It's not just Joshua that gets up early. The whole army, the whole people get up at daybreak because they're ready to witness Yahweh's victory. So yeah, I think that Randy was dead on with the faith being strong there, that as time is going on, as each day is passing, they are not losing faith. They are not beginning to question the insanity of whatever they are doing. They are excited because they know that victory is closer. They are obeying God. They're doing exactly what He told them to do. They haven't seen the results yet, but that doesn't mean that the victory isn't coming. Because God said victory would come on the 7th day, and look, tomorrow is the 2nd day. It's like Christmas. Everyone wakes up early. Got to see what's going to be unwrapped in this city when the walls fall down. It's time for victory, and everyone there is ready for it. So on day 7, the ark goes around the city 7 times. Something is different. The people are still just standing there, silently watching as the ark goes round and round. The narrative is a bit of a tease here, because as the ark goes around the 7th time, the narrative kind of pauses. And before it actually happens, it interjects the earlier instruction. I think this is probably not chronological here, because it would be a little bit nonsensical for Joshua to say, shout, and then here are the detailed instructions of what you do when you get it. I think it's combining those things that happened at some different times. The detailed instructions of what you do when you get in are being said before. So here's the interjection. When you enter into the city, we go down into there. Verse 16, the chronological part is shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And what would have happened then is they shouted and all the other things happened. The interjection is verse 17. And the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But you, keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction, and bring trouble upon it. But all silver and gold, and every vessel of bronze, iron, are holy to the Lord, and they shall go into a treasury of the Lord. I don't think Joshua said all that right there as the ark made its 7th lap around. I think that was probably said that morning or on an earlier day, reminding them what they needed to do. But here, it's put this way in the narrative for the literary effect of kind of delaying the climax, delaying the payoff, so that it builds up even more. That's perfectly fine to do. That doesn't take away from the historical impact of this. I'm not saying that this is a fictional story. I'm saying that the Bible, even while talking about history, is not always written in a chronological, dry sense of this happened, and then that happened, and then that happened. It is a story of real things that happened. So these events are historical, but the way they are presented to us is done to teach us certain things. And so that's why some things are talked about, some things are glossed over, and some things can be rearranged a little bit like this for the narrative effect, even though they did really happen. So the instructions. You go into the city, and God has devoted this city to the Lord for destruction. That word devoted is a word that we talked about some, that herem, that H-E-R-E-M. that is just a devoted thing. But we think of a devoted thing, think about how Christians are devoted to God, how you might be devoted to your spouse. This is a different kind of devotion in this context. This is something that has been set aside, in this case, for destruction. That this is the Lord's judgment. That the city of Jericho, its people, and the possessions within it are now beyond mercy. They are now reserved for fire, reserved for destruction. If we want to borrow some New Testament language, you might remember that. Because God has determined to destroy them. That is going to be a common theme we see throughout this book. Remember, we talked about how this is a holy war that is being led by God. The people of Israel are here to do the Lord's bidding, to destroy all these people because of their wickedness, because of their great evil against the Lord. And then also so that they can be given the land that God had promised to them. But it is good for them to remember, before they get the heady rush of conquest and victory, these peoples are devoted to the Lord for destruction. Do not spare them. Do not spare any of the plunder, the loot that's not for you to take. This is for the Lord. The only exception to this, there's two exceptions really. For people, it's Rahab and her household, and we already discussed why. When the spies went into Jericho, Rahab harbored the spies, protected the spies, and so her faith in choosing Yahweh means that she is spared. Anyone that she's able to convince, anyone that she's able to get in her house with her, that was the condition they were given. You bring anyone you want in who agrees with you on this, we'll spare them too. They've got to be in your house. If they're out in the street, if they're out somewhere else, then they will be destroyed. And if you're out in the street, you'll be destroyed. So stay close to home.
Not to give it anything away in the future, but Lot's wife,
Yeah.
her heart was with the evil,
Yeah.
and she was turned to salt. Of course, fire and brimstone, that turned into a salt flat, so it was like she was down there.
Yeah.
So here's a situation where don't take any of the cursed things, or you will be like the destruction that's going to happen in there.
Yeah.
And so if someone is going to steal something,
Yeah.
crazily as that may sound, they may find that they're going to get burned too.
Yeah, that's, there's a foreshadowing here, because in this case, they all do what they're told. That's not going to be the case later on.
So the gold and silver, though, was taken and put into the treasury,
Yes.
correct?
That is the other exception here. So Rahab, one exception, and her family. The second exception is the gold and silver and the bronze and iron vessels as well. And that is put into the treasury as something for the Lord. This is kind of seeding the treasury, the wealth that would be generated for the people, really for the service of the Lord as they get established in this land. But it's not for their own personal use. They don't get to just take it to enrich themselves.
Yeah, I was trying to remember if I had read anything about the disbursement of these kinds of things after the battle. I don't remember reading anything. I'm assuming it was put under the care of the priests for the tabernacle, and because they don't get their land, they don't get land, they get cities. So I'm
Right.
assuming it was something like that.
Right, yeah, this is gonna be things for service of the Lord in particular. So yeah, probably the priests ended up actually dealing with those things later, but it's definitely wrong. Okay.
I think the idea here is the same as the idea of first fruits. First fruits belong to God. And that, of course, is to teach patience and satisfaction of God's ways. And it's the same with our giving. Our giving is to be the first fruit, is to be, God gets it first, and then we deal with whatever's left over in our lives. And it's to teach us patience.
Absolutely. And to show that it's God who always gets the first thing, and it's God who is the most important, and the fact that this war, this holy war, is really about God and not about the people of Israel, even though they are going to get a promised land out of spoils and they're going to be blessed, this is still really more about God than it is them. Aaron?
Yeah, I think Barry's right. And in the city of, well, most people say AI, but I think it's AI. God does let them take of the spoils of that city. So it's,
I think that's the one that they still weren't supposed to, but they ended up doing it. And
no, Achan takes from Jericho, and then they lose the first battle because he took the accursed thing,
yeah,
and then they deal with the issue,
Yeah.
and then they have victory
yeah.
in that city, and they're allowed to take of the spoil.
Right, yes,
But-
yes. And there will be other times that they're allowed to get plunder and spoils from these battles. It's not that they're never allowed to do so. God is giving them the bounty of this land. He's not keeping them impoverished, and the idea isn't just for them to subsist off of manna forever, right? The manna's already dried up. There's no more manna to be given to them, so they're getting more of the produce of the land, they're getting more of the riches and the wealth of the land. It's just in this first battle, God gets the first fruits. God gets this first. And there will be plenty to go around later on. If they do take of these devoted things, devoted to destruction, then they'll make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. Kind of an interesting, we'll talk a lot more about this in the next chapter, that this sin of one person can bring reproach upon the whole camp, can bring consequences upon the whole camp. And so they need to be careful to obey God in this, not just for their own sake, but also so they don't bring defeat and destruction upon all of their people. And that is the nature of sin. It never just affects one person. That's one of Satan's greatest lies. Do whatever you want, it only affects you. It's never the way that it works. So they have all these instructions, but now we go back to the chronological time, things in order, that the ark has gone around 7 times, and Joshua finally says to all the people, shout. And the people shout, trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, they all shout, the wall fell down flat. And the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and captured the city. We have some archaeological evidence that, of how some of that worked out. The walls, like the mud brick walls on top here, crumbled and slid down, basically making a ramp or a pile they were able to get over that retaining wall mound there underneath, which is good because that's pretty tall and hard to get over. And this is already a ramp, and then these have fallen down flat as well, so they're able to just kind of climb over. So even with all this elevation change, it is now possible for them to get over the piles of rubble and up into the city. It's not just walls falling down and now they can walk across into the city. There's distance up that they have to go. The other thing that we see from some archaeological evidence is that there's one part of this outer wall on the north side that didn't fall down, not all the way. That there's like an 8-foot tall part of that wall that's still there, and maybe there was more at some point in time. But it, like, after everything else has crumbled, it's just right there. And there are houses built in that part of the wall. Who lived in a house that was built into that outer wall? Greyhound? Like, is it coincidence that there's one stretch of wall right there that didn't fall down, that was completely unharmed and untouched for the people to go and to rescue Greyhound?
If you go there, you can look and you can see that there's this one small section sticking way up.
Yeah.
And you see a window up there.
Yeah. We're hanging out that window. These things are not accidents. They're not coincidences. God worked in exactly the way that he said that he would, to give them access into the city and for Rahab to be saved. Rahab and her family are saved. Joshua makes good on that promise. God makes good on that promise. and she lived with the Israelites from that time forward. You know, we've already noted she wasn't a moral person exactly. I mean, she's a prostitute. She lied. She, I'm sure, had plenty of other things that were wrong as well. But she recognized God. She wanted to be on God's side. And I'm sure her knowledge of God grew as she lived with the Israelites, learning more about this God that she is choosing to follow. Thanks, everybody. Next week, we will continue on.